What's up everybody, I'm Derek, this is Rocking eForge, and today I'm going to be making a clip that holds the end of a pair of tong reins in order to keep your tongs shut around a piece of stock. So let's get the forge fired up and let's get rocking. Alright, so I'm starting out with a piece of 1/4 by 1/2 inch flat stock. The length doesn't really matter. First thing I'm going to do here is just forge off what's going to become one portion of what holds the tongs, what holds the reins rather, over the horn here, and I want to just forge this down pretty skinny. Then I want to kind of make this end a bit hook-like. So I'm going to use the edge of the anvil to forge that a little bit more abrupt, I guess, for lack of a better word. And the reason for that is once I get this all fully shaped, this little hook area is going to be one of two options to clamp around the end of the reins on a pair of tongs, and that'll hook around and hold a pair of tongs together. And I'm going to facilitate making that more hook-like by taking the end of the stock here and punching a hole in it. Doing this without a glove actually throws me off a lot. And I'll get to why in a minute. And I'm just punching this hole one more time to get the plug inside there nice and compressed. Then I'm going to flip this over and back punch this through with the punch here, right where you can kind of see a shiny point on the back side. That's good. And there is that hole punched. And the point in doing this is actually going to be another hook. And I'm going to chisel this portion in half and bend that out and then make both of these curves into their own hooks that'll fit around different sizes of tongs, or tongs that have reins that are different widths apart. Now I could have gotten that hole a little bit more centered, and I'm definitely going to cut off this excess later on, but I think in the grand scheme of things it's not going to affect the ability for this thing to work in the long run, and I think it'll work out pretty alright. And I'm going to go ahead and chisel that from the opposite side, and hopefully I can line it up well. I don't know if that made an actual difference here. But I don't want to chisel into my anvil, so I'm going to go get a sacrificial plate to put under this so I can chisel all the way through. Alright, and this is just a sheet of sheet metal that I'm putting underneath it just to make sure that I'm not cutting into my anvil directly. I'm going to be completely honest, I'm not super happy with the way this is turning out. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to cut off this portion of it. I'm going to try to remake one similar to this in this video, but I'm going to go ahead and cut this off and turn this into a single hook with a punched hole down here, and then I'm going to retry this same style of this in a minute after I've kind of worked out this one. Alright, so let's go get this thing worked out. Now needless to say, or maybe not, all you would have to do is forge this out. Just thin down a piece of flat stock and then punch a hole in this end to make this size or style. And I'm just evening this out so it looks better. And I'm just going to put a little taper, kind of a flat taper on this. just to make it easier to curve at the end. So now I'm going to punch the hole in the center of this and then cut it off, and I will drift that hole a little bit wider than the punched hole is, and then we can shape this thing and move on to the second attempt at that first style that I was trying to make. Got a little deja vu coming back to punch holes. This time, I'm going to go ahead and start by throwing my by throwing my ball end punch in the water. I'm going to start by using my ball end punch to roughly approximate the center of this as kind of a center punch almost. But also this will give me something to seat my round punch in order to continue punching out that hole once I've got this wide enough. All right, so now I've got that hole centered this time and looking pretty good and wide enough to fit the tip of this punch in. So I'm gonna throw that back in the fire and we'll get to finishing up punching this hole. Now again, I've got that shiny spot on the back that I'm just gonna back punch through. And that plug is still stuck in there. So first, see if I can get that out of there just by forging it flat. No, looks like it's not quite separated back here. So we're gonna do one more, make sure it's flat, and then do one more solid strike with this round punch. And there we go. All right, so now I'm gonna go ahead and cut this off right about there. I'll take it to the bandsaw, and then I'll come in and drift this hole a little wider so that it will fit on any of my tongs that are, you know, not tiny. And then we'll shape the hook portion and we'll move on from there. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and drift this a little wider using just my round drift. All right, so that is obviously not wide enough to fit all of my tong reins, and as such, I'll do another heat of drifting this, and then I'll head to the horn of the anvil in order to knock in those sharp corners. All right, so this is widened out, but it is still not wide enough to fit the reins of my bigger sets of tongs through. But once I head to the horn of the anvil and forge down these corners and kind of even out this whole loop, it should be plenty big to fit around pretty much any pair of tong reins that I've got. And this is really similar to forging a bottle opener, if you've ever seen me forge my loop style bottle openers. And what I'm gonna do similar to those bottle openers is just hammer down at an angle so that it knocks down the sharp corners of the loop. And it knocks down those inner corners as well and makes the loop ever so slightly wider by just forcing a little bit of extra stretching of that steel. And we'll use our tong reins here as an analog. As you can see, we successfully widened that loop out enough to accommodate one of my pairs of tong reins. The logical next step is to simply grab a pair of tongs and bend the end of this over the pair of tongs so that it is fitted wide enough to fit around the reins. However, when a pair of tongs is holding something, the reins are going to be wider than if they are not holding something. You don't want to end up making the hook too skinny by fitting them up on a pair of tongs that are fully shut in order to avoid being unable to squeeze the tong reins into the actual clip and thus making it useless. So the idea here is going to be probably determining what the average width of my tong reins are across the various tongs that I own, because some are significantly skinnier than others, and probably making one that'll fit larger pairs of tongs, and then the other one that I'll make in this video will fit 2 different sizes of tongs, just to kind of make an average of something that works pretty well. And before I go ahead and actually shape this thing, I am going to knock down these corners. All right, so I think I've decided that among my various pairs of tongs, this one is actually going to be pretty well an okay average for fitting this up on. And I am going to use this as a bit of a jig for bending this on this next heat. This is already cold at this point. But change of plans. I'm gonna go ahead and just bend this over the edge of the anvil or the horn, and will fit up after I've got it bent, because that did not seem to work. This obviously looks like it's way too big for this pair of tongs, but I'm gonna go ahead and fit something in the jaws of this and try this out before I make any major adjustments here. All right, so I've got a piece of 1/4-inch square stock fitted in this. So now, as I mentioned previous, this is too wide, so I'm gonna have to try this on a different pair of tongs perhaps. And I'm learning through this process that this may be very tong dependent. All right, so it works for this pair of wolf jaw tongs, which I dig. That works pretty all right. Doesn't have a lot of tension. It can shift around and move a little bit, but it keeps the tongs from opening, which is kind of the point here. And it allows me to just set a pair of tongs down with the stock in it. I don't know how I managed to do that balance that perfectly on the horn without even trying. That is the concept with this type of clip, right? So let's see if it works on a different pair of tongs. It won't even fit over the tongs that I've got extra bulbous ends to them. And obviously you can move this type of clip up and down the tong reins wherever it will actually meet tension, if it's a pair that's actually further apart than you want them to be. But all in all, I think this worked out pretty well. I am going to forge that second clip, and I'm going to make the loop a little bit wider on that one to hopefully fit over the more bulbous ends that I've got on some of the reins of some of my tongs, and give myself a couple more options for size. But I'm gonna throw this thing back in the fire real quick, brush this thing up, and then give it a touch mark, and then we'll move on to the second attempt on that first design. All right, so it also is worth noting that once you've got this thing shaped, you can just throw this in the fire, heat it up, and bend it more or bend it less in order to fit a particular set of tongs that you're working on. So don't feel too obligated to make different sizes if all you need is one. Having multiple around does give you the opportunity to not have to do that and have different sizes, or say you're using two different pairs of tongs and you want to lock a couple of things in said pairs of tongs. But you don't have to, for sure. Perfect. There we go. There's one. Now time to move back to the flat stock. And it's worth noting here that this is most useful when you can squeeze your tongs. Most tong reins have a little bit of elasticity to them, which means you can squeeze them tighter, pull this up to the end, and then it will keep tension in the tong reins and keep that piece that you're working on locked in your tong, so that you can go ahead and just leave your tongs attached to whatever you're working on, put it in the fire, walk away from it, and you don't have to worry about trying to struggle to get something lined up in the jaws of your tongs and get it all awkward. But you can line this up in your tongs cold, and then just go ahead and stick that piece in the fire with your tongs attached and not have to worry about it, which I think is pretty awesome. So I'm gonna do that for the rest of the video for the second clip here. All right, so I'm coming at this with a different tactic this time around. I'm gonna leave about a square's worth of material off the edge of the anvil. I'm just gonna forge that down to a more square corner than I was trying to last time. Flatten that out and then bring that to the near edge of the anvil at an angle, maybe not that much of an angle, but at an angle to define the clip portion of the clip. And that just makes it a little more accurate to get in the hook portion of this, as opposed to starting on the horn of the anvil like I did the first time. And I am going to come to the horn to even out the center portion of this by running it back and forth across the horn like this. All right, so we're once again going to use the ball end punch to start this hole. And that looks a lot more centered than the first attempt, which is good. All right, so this time I am going to do like I did with the first one and drift this hole and forge in the corners, and then I will cut it to make the two hooks of the loops. And I think that'll work out all right. And I managed to get that drifted this time in one go. So we're gonna go ahead and next heat, knock in those corners to get that worked out. So the next thing I'm gonna do now that I've got this loop forged out is to just cut it, and I'm gonna cut it at the bandsaw this time so that I don't have the rag issue that I had with the previous set, which I would have had to cut out and grind away anyway. I'm just gonna use the bandsaw and then pull the inner portion of this in to make that hook, and then leave this pretty well hooked the way it is there. Now, to give another option on how to forge these, you certainly wouldn't have to punch this hole if you didn't want to, and you don't have to punch this hole either if you don't want to. So I'm just gonna actually cut it off here and then forge this down into a taper, make a ring out of it on that side, and that way you can more easily control the size of the loop that goes over the end of the tongs without having to punch that hole and be kind of subject to the size of stock that you started with. And it's definitely not because I forged this too long and I didn't feel like starting again. Definitely not. And I'm just gonna forge this down into another taper, similar to what I did with the other one. All right, not too bad. All right, so now I'm just gonna form this into a ring. And forming the loop like this gives me the opportunity to actually be able to resize that as necessary to fit different types of tongs. So this fits my smaller wolf jaw tongs, but the way it is currently, it does not fit this pair of V-bit tongs because of its big bulbous end. And I can absolutely very easily heat that up any day I need to, come in with a pair of scrolling tongs, bend that outward, and then bend that around and size that to a particular pair of tongs that I'm using, which is definitely the reason I decided to go with this second design this time. There we go, it's better. I'm gonna go ahead and cut this end down to make it possible to fit a rein in there, and it should be just wide enough to still wrap around the tong reins. What I'm also gonna do is come in with a round file and clean up the inside of that corner to just make it a little less lumpy in there. That unfortunately is just kind of the results of how I forged this out, but I don't think it turned out too bad regardless. So now I should be able to test this out on multiple sizes of tongs, or even for that matter, multiple stock sizes. So this is a pair of tongs that I use to hold pretty small stock with usually. In the event that I need to hold something, significantly smaller than that 1/4 inch stock. But I'm just gonna use this drill bit for illustration purposes. And this design allows me to use this clip on a single pair of tongs and hold multiple different sizes of stock just by being able to transition from one of those hooks to the other in just a matter of seconds. Let's see if it works on these wolf jaw tongs, because they are skinnier. Obviously, the bigger hook isn't gonna work, but if I move the smaller hook further, never mind. All right, so it's not obviously going to be perfect on every single pair of tongs, and that's where the utility of adjusting the loops and the hooks to meet whatever requirements you have can be super useful when it comes to making things like this. So I'm gonna go ahead and throw this back in the fire, brush it up, touch mark, and we will be finished with this project. There you have it. Alrighty, that is going to do it for today's video. I do hope that you got some good ideas following this video, and let me know in the comment section if you decided to forge a couple of these. But I do hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please drop a like, leave a comment, hit subscribe, ring that notification bell. If you want to support me in the channel further, please consider becoming an honorary striker on my Patreon. That link is in the description below the video. Or please consider becoming a member on my YouTube channel. And as always, keep on rocking.